December the 28th, 1992. It was a bank holiday Monday and people across the UK were enjoying the afterglow of Christmas. One family, the Clarks from Maersk, England, were no different, but they couldn't have begun to imagine what was going to happen to them that day and the effect that it would have on their lives. This is the truth inside the unsolved case of Stephen Clark. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode from The Truth Inside. Today we'll be covering the unsolved disappearance of Stephen Clark. According to the Missing Persons Report, he enters a public toilet never to be seen again. Was it foul play, or did he disappear voluntarily? I'm going to start off by saying that as this is The Truth Inside, we will be separating fact from fiction to explore what we really do know about the case of Stephen and what happened that day. That being said, with a case like Stephen's, or any unsolved case, there are gaps in the story, gaps that we don't have the facts for. Where this is the case, I will be asking questions, but I'll make it clear that the answer is unknown and that any opinions shared are my own. And, as with all unsolved cases, any people mentioned are innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. I'll have all of my sources linked should you wish to go away and do your own research. Let's begin. The Who. Throughout this deep dive, we'll be talking about three key players. The first, of course, is Stephen. The rest of the Clark family is made up of his parents, Charles and Doris, although he does have a sister, Victoria, who is 1 year younger. She doesn't feature in this story, and in fact, very little has been said about her at all. To provide some background, Stephen was born in Colchester, Essex, on the 30th of August 1969. Which made him 23 years old at the time of his disappearance in 1992. Despite being born in Essex, Stephen spent his early childhood living near Edinburgh in Scotland. At around the age of 2, he was involved in a road accident in which he was seriously injured after being hit by a lorry. Doris's mother had gone to the shops but hadn't initially realised that it had followed. When she did and turned around, she saw a lorry go by and she realised he'd been hit to the ground. In Doris's own words, she said after the accident he was a very different little boy to the one they knew. This childhood road accident left him with some physical disabilities, a severely damaged left arm, a damaged leg and a pronounced limp. Following this, from 1974 to 1979, when he was aged between 5 and 11 years, he attended a school in a small town near Cambridgeshire, before moving to South Africa in 1980 at the age of 11. After living there for 10 years, his family returned to the UK and lived in Guildford, Surrey. Finally, at the age of 22, Stephen and his family moved to Maersk in the summer of 1991. Maersk is a large village in the United Kingdom, located on the northeast coast, situated between the seaside resorts of 𝗥𝗲𝗀 and Saltburn. When he moved to Maersk, he did some work for 𝗥𝗲𝗀𝗀 Home, which is also known as Maersk Hall, and at the time of his disappearance, Stephen was attending the Rathbone Society in 𝗥𝗲𝗀, which worked with people with disabilities to improve their employment skills. Stephen had just won the Apprentice of the Year award. As for Stephen's parents, Charles and Doris, both had backgrounds in the police, leaving in the late 60s. Doris had served approximately 10 years, Charles 5, before he quit to set up a car rental business. The when and the where. December the 28th, 1992, Saltburn, England. Saltburn, or Saltburn by the Sea, is a seaside town based in Redcar, Cleveland, the northeast of England. It's estimated, as of 2020, to have a population of approximately 6,000 residents, and popular spots are the pier, which is the most northerly pier on the east coast, and the funicular cliff lift, which connects it to the main town. In proximity to where the Clarks lived, Saltburn is only a 6 to 7 minutes drive away, less than 3 miles. It's common for people to travel the coastal route between Maersk and Saltburn, enjoying the walk along the expanse of beach. The what? On the morning of December the 28th, 1992, a bank holiday Monday just after Christmas, Stephen was given a choice of what to do that day. His father Charles was a huge Middlesbrough FC supporter. FC standing for football club, so soccer in America, and was due to go to the afternoon match where 𝗥𝗲𝗀 were playing at home against Chelsea. Despite Stephen and his father enjoying regular matches together, as quoted by his father during an ITV documentary in 2021, he said, "I was talking to Stephen about coming, and I said he needed to pay for the game. He changed his mind like the tight little fisted fellow he was. I said, 'I'm going, are you coming?' and he said no." Therefore, rather than attend the match like he would usually do with his father, Stephen found himself on a walk with his mum, Doris, along the promenade at Saltburn. From here on in, I will explain to you what Doris and Charles have claimed happened that day. Over the years, there have been inconsistencies, so I'll share the different versions of events as they've been presented. At the end, I'll give a brief overall summary of what is said to have happened that day before we start discussing the individual elements in more detail. Saltburn was only a 2 to 3 mile walk away from their home in Maersk, and Doris said that the walk would usually take them only 40 to 45 minutes, so it's estimated that they must have left home around the 2:15 p.m. mark, although Doris has never been able to give definitive times. Doris herself can't remember if they left the house together or if Stephen walked on ahead and she followed to catch him up. Either way, Doris said that they walked along the beach towards Saltburn, and it was during the walk when they reached the toilets near the promenade that Stephen said he needed the toilet and proceeded to walk into the gents. The toilets themselves are housed in a white brick building with red trim. Behind them stands the Saltburn beach cliffs and in front the beach. There's one door with a ramp directly outside for access. The doorway leads into a small entrance area where the door to the ladies is opposite the main door and the gents is off to one side. Now there are different accounts from Doris here regarding what happened once Stephen had gone into the toilets. In past articles about the case, it was said that she nipped into the toilets herself at the same time, but in later articles published by the Daily Mail, and more recently in the ITV TV documentary, she said that she didn't go in right away. He went in. I sat on the wall outside, then decided I might as well go into the ladies. When I came out, I sat again. She then goes on to say, there were 2 men with a little girl, and they went into the toilets too, one after the other. I remember thinking it was a sign of the times that they didn't want to leave a little girl on her own. So it's not clear if Doris went in when Stephen went in, or whether she waited a moment or two before deciding to use the facilities herself. Whichever account, Doris maintains that when she did finally come out of the toilets, she never saw Stephen do the same, and she hasn't seen him again since. So what did Doris do when her son didn't come back out? Well, again, over time she is given 2 versions. Taking her words. Version 1. When I came out, I did look around, but then I thought, I'll just pop home and get the kettle on and be waiting for him. So in effect, she looked around for him, didn't see him, so immediately left. Version 2. When I came out and waited for quite a while to see if he was there or if he was coming out, nothing happened. He didn't appear and we haven't seen him since. Further explaining. I wouldn't know what happened to him, I just stood there as long as was feasible. In my statement to the police I said 15 minutes, it might have been longer. So, in this version, rather than leave almost immediately, she spent a period of time waiting to see if Stephen would materialise. Regardless of wait, Doris assumed he had gone home, so left. Depending on the version of events, the time that Doris left the beach is open to interpretation. If she briefly looked around for him and then left, it's possible that she left around the 3:10, 3:15 mark and would have been home by 4 p.m. If she waited longer, the 15 minutes or so that she said, which would tie up quite nicely with watching 2 people go in and out of the toilets, then she would have been home later, perhaps about 4:15. It was sunset around 3:45, so she would have been walking in relative darkness. When Doris got home, Charles would have still been out, because if you remember, whilst all of this was going on, Charles was at the 𝗥𝗲𝗀𝗀 versus Crystal Palace match, albeit police can't say for certain if he was there. Assuming his story is correct, we know that kick-off was at 3 p.m. due to various sources, including a programme Charles has from the match itself. A football match lasts approximately 90 minutes, but with half time and the inevitable time it takes to get out of the stadium, back in the car and then travel the 25-minute journey home, it's assumed that Charles would have been home by approximately 6 p.m. At this stage, Doris said that she had last seen Stephen at approximately 3 p.m, so 3 hours ago. When she told Charles this, within 10 minutes they were out looking. Charles immediately went to 𝗪𝗲𝗀 and to the toilets, as this was where Doris had last seen their son. He went and looked along the beach, and as he walked across the sand dunes, which don't make for easy walking, he remembers vividly worrying, and to this day continues to worry, that Stephen may have got caught in a crevice between some rocks somewhere, and due to his disability would not have been flexible enough to get out. That being said, neither Charles nor Doris nor the police have ever found Stephen. Doris and Charles also phoned the police around the 6:30, 7 p.m. mark and were told to wait before they could properly report him missing, although police have no copies of the call due to the passage of time, so the definitive time they called is unknown. Now that we've heard the story, let's very quickly summarise the afternoon and evening's events before we get into a bit more detail as to what might have happened. 2 p.m, possibly earlier, Charles leaves home in Mars to go to the match, ready for a 3 p.m. kick-off. 2:15, although it's possible it could have been earlier, Doris and Stephen set out on a walk along the beach to 𝗪𝗲𝗀, so 40 to 45 minutes for the average walker. 3 p.m, Stephen and Doris are now in 𝗪𝗪𝗀 near to the pier. They're ready to return home when Stephen decides to nip to the toilet, and Doris does likewise, whether that's at the same time or a few minutes later. Doris exits the ladies. From here we have two versions of what she did. She either had a quick look round and then left for home, so 3:15, or she waited 15 to 20 minutes, so she would have left around 3:30, getting her home at anywhere between 4 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. 6 p.m. onwards, Charles returns home from the match and finds out that Stephen is missing. Charles and Doris head down to the beach with torches to search, but admit that it's a huge area to look for someone, and at some point within the next hour or so, a call to the police is made. So that's your rundown of events from the day, so let's go back through the events in a little more detail. Not going to the match. This was a typical thing for Stephen to do with his father, so the big question is why not this time? Especially with it being a bank holiday match and one so close after Christmas. It's a typical thing for a local supporter to do with their family, and would have been quite the atmosphere. Charles says it was because he told Stephen he would have to pay for his ticket this time, and Stephen didn't want to do that. So why this ticket? Obviously we don't know. Perhaps this wasn't the first conversation they'd had in respect of this. All unknowns. What we do know is that there was definitely a match that day, and Charles on the ITV TV documentary shows a programme from the event. Was it his? We'll have to assume so, but Charles was never confirmed as being at the match. This is odd to me given the number of people there, even the people sat next to him. And if he wasn't there, what was he doing? The walk itself. According to Cleveland Police, the force investigating Stephen's disappearance, to this day has said that no one has ever come forward to say that they saw Stephen or Doris on their walk at any point or near to the toilets in which Doris said that Stephen went missing. So it's entirely possible that the walk never even happened. If that's the case, what did happen that afternoon, and what would be the reason for the walk to be fabricated? If the walk did happen, Doris said they either went together or Stephen went ahead and she caught up. So were they planning a walk together? If they were, you would assume that they would leave at the same time. Why would Stephen walk on ahead? Unless, of course, Stephen suggested the walk and Doris maybe didn't initially want to go, so she changed her mind and caught up. Or had they had a disagreement, so Stephen left the home and went on ahead? This point has never been clarified. The toilets and the alleged last sighting. This is the first part of the case that really rings alarm bells for me. Now be aware this is my own opinion. However, if anyone, whether it be a child, partner, parent, friend, relative, went into the toilets and never came out, my first instinct would be to check what's happened, whether I would shout into the toilets or ask someone to go in there and check. Anything as opposed to assuming they had left and headed home. Knowing this baffled many people, Doris tried to explain that, but at the time it didn't even occur to me. He's a 23-year-old man. I couldn't waltz into the gents and say, "Are you finished?" Maybe if he'd been 3. And people say, "Why didn't you go in?" But you were not for a 23-year-old man. Whilst this doesn't sit right with me, or many people for that matter, it is possible. We don't know their relationship, and you do have to bear in mind that this happened in 1992. Behaviours today might be different from behaviours back then. Would this have embarrassed him? Was this something he had done before, and therefore she thought it was perfectly normal behaviour? It's hard to say, and whilst I do have my own opinion, the fact of the matter is she said she didn't check. Regardless of reason, we can only work with what she's told us. So let's rewind to Stephen entering the toilets. Would Doris have ever seen him come out, or would he have always come out before her? And if he did come out before her, what kind of lead could he have realistically had on her had he decided to leave straight for home or go elsewhere? If Doris had waited outside for a moment or two before deciding to go into the toilets herself, it all depends on how long she waited. Assuming she'd sat on the wall directly outside and then made an almost immediate decision to go into the toilets herself, then no, it's likely it wouldn't have given Stephen much time to go into the toilet, wash his hands, come back out, etc. before her. But if she lingered a moment or two before going inside herself, Stephen would have been likely to come out before her, maybe by a minute or two. But does that really give him long enough to walk away and never be seen again? If she went in at the same time, again you would assume that they would have come out at roughly the same time, or at least without a huge gap in between. Doris has never mentioned a wait to use the toilets, which could have given Stephen a head start, and we know there can't have been a queue in the gents if Doris later saw 2 men go in and come back out almost straight away. Please note though, this man and this little girl have never come forward and have therefore never been identified. So there are a number of possible theories. Of course, these are just theories, but I'll explain some of the facts that might help to prove or disprove some of these. Theory number 1 is that Stephen voluntarily left home to start a new life somewhere else, whether he thought about this himself or was encouraged by a third party. Of course, this is a possibility, but according to all sources, Stephen didn't take anything with him. Wallet, watch, keys, and the money in his bank accounts have never been touched. Stephen was also said to be happy. He'd just won his award, and there is also talk of a possible recent girlfriend, not that much information has been shared. So, why would he leave? Equally, if you were planning to run away and start a new life, it doesn't feel like the way you would go about it. Even entering the toilets at the same time, it doesn't give you a big head start. Even if you pretended to go in the toilets and then immediately double back, it'd give you a few minutes, 5 minutes at tops. This goes back to my previous open-ended question. What kind of lead would he have realistically had on her? We know that Stephen had difficulty walking due to a limp, and we know that Doris was in and out of the toilets relatively quickly. The walk is a straight one if you went back along the beach, and there's no indication it was a bad day weather-wise impacting visibility, so wouldn't she have spotted him in the distance? The only other way he could have gone would have been up a very steep bank. Whilst there have been reported sightings of Stephen which could prove he was alive and well, none of these to date have proved credible. 2 that seem the most credible were discussed in more detail on the TV documentary and are even detailed on Cleveland Police's website, of which I will quote directly. The first is from Glenside Terrace in Saltburn by the Sea. Police received a report of a potential sighting from a woman who said she saw Stephen on Thursday the 14th of April 1993 at 5 p.m. when she was looking outside her living room window. So, this would have been over 2 weeks since Stephen allegedly went missing. She reports that he was across the road and was walking towards Glenside Terrace in Saltburn. She said she knew Stephen because her relative worked at a bowling club, and she knew that Stephen and a family member were members of the club itself. She also knew that Stephen was missing, as she saw a report in the media. The woman reports that Stephen was with another person, a man aged between 50 to 60 years old. He was of medium build and bald with grey hair around the sides, and he was wearing glasses. Stephen and the man were not talking, and it looked as if Stephen was walking to keep up. This sighting was reported in the local media on the 22nd of January 1993. The most recent investigation team looked into this reported sighting, and also at the property where the reporting person was living at the time, which was in a row of terraced houses on Glenside in Saltburn. The police reported that there was a significant distance between the living room window and the other side of the road, and it would have been dark at the time of the potential sighting. Therefore, they've ruled this out as being credible. The second reported sighting is of Stephen in Redcar Town. Police received a statement on the 3rd of January 1993 from Mr. Stan Camish, someone Stephen and Charles knew from the pub. He said that Stephen was in Redcar because at 2 p.m. on Wednesday the 30th of December, so 2 days after he allegedly went missing, he says that he saw Stephen walking past the Gazette offices, heading towards the town centre. Stan says that he was in conversation with a friend at the time and was unable to catch Stephen's eye, and he reports that Stephen was on his own. Mr. Camish was visited by a detective on the 16th of February 1999. Mr. Camish, Stan, was visited by a detective on the 16th of February 1999 about his reported sighting of Stephen in 1993. In that discussion, he said he had not seen the man's face, but it was a male who walked in a similar way to Stephen. He said it was raining heavily and the closest he was to the man was 30 yards. His widow Joyce disputes this. She says that whilst waiting at a bus stop, Stan had disappeared for a few minutes, and when he returned he said, "Did you see who I was talking to? Stephen, young Stephen. He goes into the club, the lad with the poorly arm." Days later, Joyce and Stan realised that he was actually registered as missing. Stan told Joyce that he had definitely seen Stephen. In his first statement, he saw Stephen walking towards Redcar Town Centre wearing a blue Parker-type coat. But then, Stan changed his statement and said he was 30 yards away and it was a man that just walked in a similar way, but he did not see the person's face or talk to them. Again, due to the details surrounding this sighting, the police have ruled this out as credible. Theory number 2 is that Stephen was murdered in the toilets, either accidentally or on purpose. Murder. Now, unless someone was following him, it feels like a very small window of opportunity to come across someone in a toilet who makes an instant decision to kill. Even if an altercation after a disagreement of some sort had happened, it doesn't give you long enough to kill and then subsequently dispose of a body before you could potentially get caught. We have to remember it was the afternoon on a bank holiday where all number of people would have been out walking along the beach and walking along the promenade. And if Doris was in the ladies next door, you would assume that she would have heard something. Theory number 3 is that Stephen had an accident in the toilets and died. This seems highly unlikely. Even though Doris didn't check, and in theory Stephen could have been lying in there injured, Doris said she saw 2 men use the toilets, so you'd think they would have seen or heard something even if they came out before Stephen. If Stephen did have an accident, why did no one find him at all? Well, that leads into theory number 4, that Stephen has gone into the water or fallen off the cliffs near the beach. Whether that's due to confusion following a slip or trip, whether it's accidental, whether it's murder, or indeed whether it was to end his own life. I'll start by saying that this has been pretty much ruled out by the police, but also by local people and local authorities. There are a lot of walkers and fishermen in the area. Had he fallen, or purposely walked off the cliff, everyone is pretty confident that his body would have been spotted or would have been discovered at some point over the following days or weeks. Also, could this have really been a terrible accident? Had he accidentally slipped? Because for it to be an accident and Doris to have had no knowledge of this, it would be reliant on Stephen walking off on his own. Even if he had have come out the toilets before her, which we've discussed is likely, why didn't he wait for her? Again, we don't know the answer, but you would be safe to assume that if you were on a walk out with someone, you would wait for them. Even if he had come out the toilets before her, which we've discussed is likely, why didn't he wait? Again, we don't know the answer, but you would be safe to assume that if you're on a walk with someone, you would wait for them. Even if you didn't know they had gone into the toilets, it's a natural assumption to think they must have gone in two, and therefore you wouldn't walk off. It just doesn't feel plausible he would have come out and gone, unless he thought Doris had done the same, headed home, or if there had realistically been some reason why he would have gone on without her, much like she said he might have done at the start of the afternoon. So I guess our question is, why would he have been walking alone to trip and to fall? Self-harm has also been ruled out, as there are no indications Stephen felt this way. But again, given the previous details, his body would have been quickly discovered even if this had have been the case. Theory number 5 is that Stephen was kidnapped and is being held hostage. Again, you'd question the window of opportunity and the location itself. It's not an ideal place to kidnap someone, small quarters and not many places to run. It's not like you could have a car waiting outside. Despite Stephen's disabilities, he was a tall guy, 6 foot and broad, not the easiest of targets. Again, it's unknown, but it doesn't feel like a reality to me. There have never been any ransom notes, and it really is unclear what the purpose would be. If it was a random encounter, again, it still feels unlikely with the ladies next door and the general location, so steep hills behind the toilets, the sea in front, a straight promenade, that this is the type of place that you would kidnap someone. Finally, theory number 6. Stephen never went on the walk and was either murdered or killed accidentally by someone, perhaps the parents. Well, the police evidently felt that this was credible, given the lack of actual proof of the walk itself. On the 8th of September 2020, a warrant was issued, and on the 14th of September, Charles and Doris were arrested on suspicion of murder of their son. At the time of Stephen's disappearance, they would have been in their 50s. Charles and Doris had their house and garden searched on the 18th of September. For the police to get a warrant, they would have needed reasonable grounds to suspect they had been involved in something, and something to support this hypothesis. One of the reasons for this search was due to a letter that the police received in 1999 from an anonymous source. Charles and Doris were named in it. The letter was sent to the police in 1999, so 7 years after Stephen's disappearance. The letter was in possession of the police for almost 20 years when the letter writer finally came forward. It was determined, however, that the author, a woman, had no involvement with the Clarks and didn't know them. She wrote the letter in good faith, but had no proof of her claims, which now makes this letter of little to no use to the investigation. So why did the police suspect them when there was really no new evidence? Well, the letter at the time factored into this, but also the fact that Charles and Doris's account has changed over time, and that they can't confirm that the walk happened, nor that Charles ever went to the football. During the ITV documentary, parts of the actual warrant were shown, and it states that they were looking for human remains of Stephen, documentation relating to someone's will, unknown as to who this person could be, and any diaries kept by Stephen, perhaps for state of mind. It looks like this was for the house and for a potential allotment. According to the police, there was an area of significance following these searches, but no remains were found. As a result, on December the 9th, 2020, Doris and Charles were bailed, and on the 15th of February 2021, Doris and Charles were released without charge and were now no longer under investigation. The police are still working on the hypothesis that Stephen has come to harm, and are open as to how this could have happened. Interestingly, there was also a potential new sighting that came to the forefront. A witness has come forward 28 years later and said that on Monday the 28th of December 1992, in the late afternoon when it was still daylight, so around the 3 to 4 p.m. mark, they had seen Stephen walking in the opposite direction from home towards a pub called the Ship Inn. The witness confirmed with her family that it was him, but said it didn't feel relevant to the case at that time. If this sighting is true, then Stephen would have looked to have only been a 3-minute walk away from his home address when he was seen. But, after so long, how can we corroborate it? Is there truth in what the witness is saying? If it's true, it could well support Charles and Doris's version of events. Perhaps he did leave the toilets before Doris at around 3 p.m. and headed home. It would certainly tie up in terms of timings. It's possible that if Doris didn't tell him she was going in to use the toilets too, he could have come out, not seen her, and figured he'd just head home. It's a possibility that if this sighting is correct, then something could have happened to him not far from his home address, with theory number 7 being that he's come to harm since leaving the toilets in Saltburn. But unfortunately, that's something we still don't know. As of today, there has been no proof of life, and detectives believe that Stephen has come to serious harm. As a result, his case continues to be one classified as suspected murder. So what happened to the man who entered the toilets never to be seen again? Hopefully, one day we'll know. Officers are appealing for information from anyone who knew Stephen at the time of his disappearance, or may have information that could help with the case. They also want to hear from anyone who may have seen something on the weekend of his disappearance, which was the Christmas bank holiday weekend, and who maybe didn't feel this was relevant at the time. If you have any information which you feel is relevant to the case, then please see the description for ways in which to report this. Until next time. Thank you for joining me as we discuss the truth inside true crime, mysteries and legends from around the world. As terrifying or as uncomfortable as the truth may be, as Theodore Roosevelt once said, in the end, the most unpleasant truth is a safer companion than a pleasant falsehood. Take care.